User experience is how a user experiences a product. Great job, thank you, Wikipedia. But the question that we're really asking is what's a good user experience? What makes a great user experience? Because it's kind of a fuzzy topic. User experience as an actual practice, as a department, standalone from any other department, is relatively new over the last 20 years or so. So there's a lot of smart people who are smarter than me who have talked about user experience. One of them's name is Mark Zuckerberg. He works at a company called Facebook. And Mark Zuckerberg says the trick isn't adding stuff, it's taking it away. Does anyone have an idea of what this might mean in terms of user experience? Making things less complicated. Excellent. Anyone else? That's great. So making things less complicated. He's basically saying your job when you're building a user experience is to take problems away from the user. It's to take all the things that the user may have interfere with whatever they're trying to do and to take them away. Steve Krug writes a great book called Don't Make Me Think. And in that book, he has a great quote, which is, "Don't make me think." And the way he likes to describe it is he says, if you're looking at a website, you can think of when you're looking at that website or that app as you're going to generate a bunch of question marks. What does this button mean? Does this search bar do what I need it to do? Is this the section I'm looking for? He says that user experience is all about taking those question marks away. That's it. You try to minimize the number of questions that a user asks as they're using your site. I was on a plane last week coming from the Bay Area from a conference, and I got a chance to sit next to a doctor, and we started talking about user experience, as you do on a plane. And he told me that at his company that he founded, because everyone in the Bay Area has founded a company, right, that they asked the question, is it OFL? Does anyone have any idea what that means? Wild guesses? I had never heard it before, so. Is it optimized for laziness? Could someone trying to be as lazy as possible to accomplish their task use this app and still be lazy? The founder of Moz, going back to being empathetic to the user, you talked about the emotions and how they're involved in user experience. He says that the biggest thing about a user experience is being empathetic to your user. What are the day-to-day things that your user is going through? Why do they need this app to make their life easier? It's about really connecting with your user base. And throughout this talk, I try to highlight the main points. I'm trying to help you build a mental framework of what user experience is. And so point number one is, a good UX gets out of the way. All of these people, all of them are trying to say is that your job as a user experience designer is to find the problems that you're supposed to be solving and get them out of the way of the user. You can think about it like Google Maps. Google Maps, nobody downloads Google Maps to have Google Maps on their phone. That's not why we download Google Maps. We download Google Maps because it takes all the problems of having to navigate through traffic, of having to know where you're going, about having to redirect yourself based on accidents away from you. Google Maps is great at taking problems away from you. It doesn't give you anything. It takes things away. What it gives you is a great user experience. So the question that I usually get when I've talked about user experience before is who's in charge of this whole process? Does anyone have any clue in a company who's in charge of this process? What department? Anyone want to take some guesses? Just throw out departments, doesn't matter. Marketing, great. PR? PR, great. Department of User Experience. Some companies do have user experience departments, so that's excellent. It's okay to be wrong. You throw them all out. There's marketing, there's engineering, right? There's design, there's brand. So, all right, I'm not going to make you guys name all the departments. But I'm going to propose a scenario to you. And I want to hear what you think. Who's in charge of this user experience? Where does the user experience fail? So I'm going to propose an app. It's an original idea. The app idea is that I can go on my phone and request a ride to somewhere, and someone will pick me up and drive me to that location. I haven't come up with a name for it yet. And there's two parallel universes of this app. In one parallel universe, it's horribly designed. It looks ugly. But we'll see how it works. And in the other one, it's beautiful. It's got beautiful animations. It's got a beautiful color palette. Everything like that is perfect. So here's our ugly app. It's got an ugly loading screen. It just says loading. And then here's our beautiful app. You can tell it's beautiful because it has a gold star on the top of it. So they're both loading, and the one on the left is done. Now, who's in charge of load time? What department? Engineering, right? Engineers are going to tell you the load time. Cool, so the app opens up, and look at that. There's 45 drivers in the area with a 1-minute wait time. All right, so let's empathize with our user for a bit. Let's picture a user. Let's call her Jane. Jane is on the street corner in San Francisco, and it's raining. It's pouring like it does in San Francisco. She's got no coat. She's got no umbrella. And she's sitting there trying to get home. So when Jane pulls up this app and she sees a 1-minute wait time, that's pretty amazing. That's excellent. She only has to be out in the rain for 1 minute. Who's in charge of getting 45 drivers into a single area? What department? Marketing, maybe, right? Getting drivers onto the road. Finance, making sure it's a financially good decision for the drivers to be out there. They're actually incentivized to be out there. What about on the other app? First of all, it stopped loading, so it took a 2-minute load time. So she's been in the rain for 2 minutes now waiting for that app to load. And there's only 2 drivers in the area, meaning there's a 15-minute wait for her. So Jane has not only waited 2 minutes for the app to load, she's also going to wait 15 minutes to get a ride. That kind of sucks, right? Can we all agree that that's a poor user experience? Now let's take the case where the app has a major meltdown. On this app, the support rep reaches out. They say, Jane, we see you have a problem. What can I do for you? Jane says, I need a ride. And the person says, I sent you a red Prius. Things are going to be great. On the other app, Jane doesn't get a call up. She has to go to the help section herself. She says, I need a ride. And they say, don't know what to tell you. So can we all agree that user experience does not equal design after this? Point number 2 is that user experience is your job. No matter what department you are in, user experience is completely your job. Whether it's customer support, engineering, any of those. So why does user experience matter? It seems like it's a lot of headache, right? We have to get a perfect customer support department. We have to get great engineers. We have to have a great marketing department. Why can't we just skip a lot of this user experience stuff? First of all, there's actual psychological things that go on with a bad user experience, mainly that it makes us tired. When our minds are working harder on day-to-day tasks, we actually get tired. We get emotionally worn out, we get physically worn out, and we get stressed. And it's actually a lot of time it's subconscious. But all of you have probably used an app where you don't like using it. You just have this feeling when you use it that you'd rather not use it right now. You'll check it later. You'll use it later. And that all actually comes from a bad user experience. It's an actual psychological effect. A good UX is also addictive. One of my favorite books, and if you want to dive into this, the book is called Hooked. It talks about how you can turn a user experience into an addiction. And that sounds a little scary because it is a little scary, but I can tell you right now that all of you have already had it happen to you. Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat all have implemented this about 2 or 3 years ago. And the idea being that when you have an excellent user experience, you can tie it to basic emotions. There's a reason that when you get bored, you open up Facebook on your phone without realizing it. It was all actually engineered that way. And it was built off of a great UX and then this hook cycle, which you can read more about. I won't talk about it here. Finally, a good UX is a competitive feature. This one's hard. A lot of people don't see user experience as a competitive feature of an app. But Aaron Levy, everyone's heard of Box.com. Box.com says, does it better will always beat did it first. And this comes into play when it comes to profit. Has anyone heard of Zendesk? Zendesk? It's the customer support software. Yeah, it's a customer support software. And they came into the market, I think it was like 10, 15, 20 years ago, whatever it was. I just saw the CEO talk last week. And he talked about how when they came into the VC rooms, they said, we're going to build a better user experience. That's going to be our competitive feature. And people said, that's not a competitive feature. You have to have more features or better features. And it turns out that they were actually right. They are now making $300 million in annual recurring revenue simply by having a better user experience. But if you don't believe that, let's try another example. Let's say you were going to do a team messaging app in the business messaging space. And let's say you're going to start it about 5 years ago. And there's literally thousands of team messaging apps, right? Everyone and their mom and their dad has done a team messaging app. But let's say you say, but ours is going to be different because it's going to have the best user experience in the world. And then let's say it takes over the entire market, 5 to 6 years, and now almost every company is using it that's not ancient. And it's a true story. Does anyone have what idea that app is? Slack. Slack is also making a ton of money, and their only offering is that they have a better user experience. Which brings us to point 3, you can't afford to have a bad user experience. You just can't. If you actually want to go somewhere and get out of the 10 to 20 user range, to get out of the 10,000 to 20,000 ARR range, you need to have a good user experience. Unless you have basically created Fusion. In that case, don't worry about it. So that's the end of this section, user experiences definition. Do we have any questions? Are we all still on board? Yeah.
Is it better to first run an app with bad user interface and then with the feedback that you get try to optimize it, or is it better to wait until you have a good user interface and then?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm going to get into that in a second, but to kind of answer in general, it's really good to use as many, we'll get into it, but use as many tricks as you can to build the best user experience possible, but know it's probably not going to be great. And then use feedback and use data to actually iterate on that. And I'll give some tools in a few minutes on how to actually do that. Sound good? And then you can yell at me if I don't answer your question, and we'll answer it at the end to make sure. Cool. Any other questions? Let's jump into section 2, meet the user. This is my favorite section because we get to learn about ourselves. Also known as the human. We like to think that we understand ourselves very well and how we do things. But it turns out that users are pretty frustrating to work with. So I have a few rules that I'm going to share with you guys. One of them is we don't read, we scan. Users will not read your web page unless you are writing a news website and they are meaning to read it as a novel. In any other case, they will scan your website looking for the information they are looking for. Now, I don't want to have to convince you guys to trust me, so I actually, about a week ago, ran these tests on 100 users. I use something called Mechanical Turk, which lets you randomly select people from around the globe, and I ran these tests. So the theory being that if we read and we scan and we don't scan, the opposite of what I just stated, we can test for it. So I created a fake website. It's a help center for a fake cable company, and it's got 3 sections: signing in, paying bill, and appointment. And at the bottom of each section is a link to read more about that section. And I asked the question to 100 users who speak English in America with high approval ratings. So I made sure that language barriers and stuff like that were not a problem. I said, you will see a section for a cable company. Go to the section that allows you to make a new appointment, right? And you guys almost instantly know what section you'd want to look at, right? Now, we can make a theory here, though, that if users are reading our entire app, and by the way, these people are getting paid to do this, so they don't want to be incorrect. They have more of an obligation than you do when you're using most websites to pick the right link. You can do a calculation. You can say there's 103 words on that page, and people read on average, good readers, 200 words per minute. And given that our link is in the bottom right corner, and then in English we read left to right, it should take 31 seconds for us to click the link. Does that make sense? The math makes sense in the theory? Does anyone have a clue of what the actual average time was to click that link? 1 second? Great. Is 4.6 seconds. So obviously, if we're 6 times faster, we're scanning. There is no way that anybody has read that entire page, or even that section, in 4 seconds from the page loading. And the cool thing is I actually had something that recorded every person's visit, and you can see what it was like. Is it? That's how quickly people use, yeah, and that's a random person. I don't know who that is. And that, like I said, average of 4. So some people did get 1 or 2 seconds. right, to average that out. Lesson 2, we don't make optimal choices, we satisfice. Has anyone heard of satisficing before? The idea of satisficing is that you will not read an entire page before you make a decision to proceed. You will pick something that goes over your threshold of thinking it will get you where you want to go, and you will click that link. Does that make sense? So you won't read an entire page before you say, that is the link for me. You will say, that link looks pretty much like the link for me. I'm going to try it out. And so we can test that. I made a fake store called Cool Store. And at Cool Store, I gave the description that you're a college student looking for a job at Cool Store. Click the link that sends you to the student job page. And if you look at Cool Store, there's some links that are interesting here. You have the jobs link right over there in the top right. But if you read the entire page, on the bottom right, it says, it's one thing to shop at Cool Store. It's another thing to work here. We just opened up our student job page, openings for higher ed. Can we all agree that that section there is the most optimal choice for a college student looking for a job? Do we all agree that? Does anyone disagree? So that is the most optimal choice. And remember, these people are getting paid to get it right. They're having more of an impetus than mostly anybody else using your website to get this decision right. So 52 out of 64 people clicked the wrong link. People getting paid to click the right link click the wrong link. Not only that, if you put it on a scatter plot, you can see that people who clicked on the fake link were 10 seconds faster than the people who clicked on the real link. What does that mean? It means that we save a lot of time when we satisfice, which is why we do it, even if it was the wrong decision. So you can watch someone who clicked the right link. Their story is much different than you would probably use the website. This is actually recording. They're actually reading the entire page because they're getting paid. So this is them reading the entire page, scrolling down, reading each section before making their final decision. They even see the college section. You can see them mouse over to it in just a second here. Boom. But they're not sure yet. They're thinking about it, and then they're like, you know what? That's probably the right section. Not many people use the web like that. As you can see, 52 out of 64 did not. Also, what's interesting, side note, you notice how people use their mouse to show where they're looking. It's an unconscious thing that a lot of people do. But talk about that. Here's what someone looks like when they satisfice. Also known as 52 of the 64 people. Done. I saw a jobs link. I'm pretty sure that's where I'm going to go. Done. They also don't get paid. Finally, rule number 3, we don't understand, we tell stories. Does anyone have any idea what this means? The idea being that nobody truly, unless maybe you are the senior principal engineer at Google, knows what exactly is going on when you use a certain piece of technology. Not all of it. And what we do is we tell stories inside of our head of things that make sense. So here's an example. Who here has helped someone older use the internet? 1, 2, come on, there's got to be more of you. Yeah. Have you guys ever seen this? Where they go to Google, and in the Google search bar, they type in www.facebook.com or gmail.com. Why do they do this? They think it's the internet. Google is the internet, right? And who's to tell them that they're wrong, right? They type facebook.com into the internet. The first link says Facebook, they click it, and it gets them where they're trying to go, right? So they've told themselves the stories that Google is the internet. And Google doesn't tell them, whoa, 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 we don't understand URLs. They say, yeah, sure, you can tell yourself that story. We'll get you there just the same. Here's a better example of people more our generation. If I were to say, what happens when you go to GoGuardian.com? First of all, how many engineers do we have in here? Wow, a lot. Cool. So if I were to say what's going on when you go to GoGuardian.com, a lot of people, maybe engineers know a lot more, would say, okay, well, it goes to the cloud. It goes to the server. Some people know there's a server. And GoGuardian.com comes back. And then there's GoGuardian.com. But what really happens is something like this, right? The engineers are like, yeah, obviously. But what really happens is something like this. But we've told ourselves a story that we go to GoGuardian.com and this nice GoGuardian.com package comes back. But what's really happening is multiple types of requests at multiple different layers, doing multiple different types of things. And this isn't even a good description, right? There's electrical signals that are actually traveling in these lines. Some of these lines are using lasers and fiber optics. But we've told ourselves a very simple story, which is it just gets here, right? And then GoGuardian.com appears. So that brings point number 4, build for the lazy noobs. Now, I'm not trying to be rude when I say lazy noobs. We're all lazy noobs in our own way. What I'm trying to say here is that we're building for the people so that they don't have to put in too much effort when they use our app. And not only that, we're building for people who don't need to understand every core intricacy of the problem we're solving, right? Let's go back to Google Maps. They built for lazy noobs. You don't have to understand the routing algorithm they used or the machine learning they're doing to understand the traffic. Why do you need to? You're a noob. You don't have to understand all of that. They're going to do that for you. All you have to worry about is where are you going. And what about being lazy? You don't need to know all the different points where it's going to have to make a decision. You don't need to know all the different reasons that Google sent you a certain route, right? They're letting you be lazy. Just go this way. Trust us. They've built for lazy noobs, and you should do the same thing. Questions? How do we feel about the user? Pretty good? Thank you. Yeah, the bootstrap was key in getting that done in a weekend. Yeah?
What if you have a specific audience and building to the lowest denominator might be insulting?
That's totally fair. That's totally fair. Even for the specific audience, these rules still apply, just at a different level, right? So they're still going to scan. They're still going to satisfy, but I totally agree, right? You don't want to baby someone. You don't want to say, here's what a button does. But I can tell you, any user group that you have is going to appreciate you making their life easier. It's not about talking down to them. It's about not making the choices or making choices for them that they don't have to get involved in, right? So you could be a traffic expert, but you still want Google Maps to make the decisions for you because it's better at it. Why would you want it to get involved, right? As long as you don't talk down to them and say, you're a little baby user, you couldn't have got there on your own, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. You're welcome to disagree with me if you, or ask more questions if you'd like. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Feel free to yell at me if you decide it doesn't. Cool. Let's jump into part 3. Why is it hard to build a phenomenal user experience? So, has anyone heard of Intercom? Intercom is a phenomenal company. They've had a unicorn growth rate, and they are in the customer support market. And the VP of product at Intercom said too many designers are designing to impress their peers rather than to solve a real business problem. This is one of the biggest problems with user experience right now. It's designers getting too pretty, believe it or not. And he uses this example, which is a great example. He says only one of these apps, these weather apps, solves the business problem. Which one is it? Bottom right? Top right? Bottom right? Cool, you guys are right. It's bottom right. Because why do you look at your weather app? What is the reason you look at your weather app? It's to know what you're going to wear, to know what the driving conditions will be, to know if you can play soccer today, right? It's how the weather affects your day. You don't care about the weather. And it's hard because we so often combine the two, the weather and how it affects our day, but they're separate things. The bottom right app actually says what it means to the user. You should bring an umbrella. It's going to rain today. All the other apps miss the point. They've missed the business reason. Tim Cook from a small little company called Apple said, Most business models have focused on self-interest over user experience. This is the idea that businesses will choose to do things that are better for themselves than for their users, to a point where it's almost obnoxious. And it might be hard to visualize this, but I can give you a simple example. How many of you have tried to read a news article and suddenly get blocked? Right? You get blocked by a subscribe to my ad, stuff like that. This is an example I have. This happened to me about 2 weeks ago. I was trying to read this guy's blog about some TCA stuff that happened. And first things first, I can't even read the beginning line of his blog article because he's got a picture of himself there. He's put a picture of himself that covers half the page. That's absurd, right? I mean, he's not a bad-looking guy, but there's no reason I should have to look at him when I'm trying to read the article, right? And this is actually a video. So right here, okay, I see where's the content. I start trying to scroll. So I start scrolling here, and boom. Please subscribe to my blog. I haven't even gotten one line in. And I did not make this up. This is an actual thing that I found on my own, not having to do with this talk. It's crazy, right? So what did he put first? He put a picture of himself, and he put a link to subscribe to his blog. He put everything about himself first, and put the only thing that I wanted to do, which was to read what he had done, second. Will Evans, who is just a design student, but he tweeted a very memorable thing that everyone has retweeted quite a bit, said, if you don't talk to your customers, how will you know how to talk to your customers? And it's kind of a funny quote because it's very obvious, but it's amazing how many companies have failed to do this. My fiance suggested that we order The Habit for dinner one night. I hadn't ever seen The Habit. I wasn't from LA. Does anyone know what The Habit is? Cool. It's a pretty amazing burger place. And so she says, can I pick up The Habit for dinner? And I said, great. I'm going to go look at the menu to figure out what to order. Now, looking at the menu of a restaurant is probably in the top 3 things that users do when you go to a website, correct? We all agree on that? Where do I look at the menu on this website? Explore. I couldn't find for the life of me for about 10 seconds where to find the menu. It's under the Explore link as the 5th menu item down. So what did they put first? They put their social media icons first. And then they put how great a burger they are. And then they put how great they did in Consumer Reports. They acted like the only reason I would go to thehabit.com is either to subscribe to their Twitter account or to read about them in Consumer Reports, because they have not talked with any of their users. They don't know why users are going to their website. It's to find out where their restaurants are and to find out what they're cooking, in majority. So that brings us to point number 5. One of the biggest points to make sure that you don't go off on the wrong track when building a user experience. Just be modest. Be modest about what you know. Be modest about where your design fits, where your creativity fits into the experience. Just be modest about the role that your app is playing in a user's life. And that's one of the biggest ones. A lot of apps aren't meant to be used 24/7, but they try to keep us on there. They try to give us stuff to do. If your app isn't meant to be used 24/7, then don't. Your job is to get out of the user's way, point number 1. Any questions on that? UX challenges, yeah. Yeah. I don't have an official name for it. It's a distraction. I mean, that might be what I call it. Yeah, it's pretty bad though. It's pretty bad. That one was specifically bad because it changed my scroll position, right? It'd be one thing if I got down in the ad and then it came up, which is still bad. But then I could X out of it and keep reading where I was. That scrolled me back to the top. I X out, and then it kept me there. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. All right, it's the fun part. How to be unoriginal. It's the meat of the presentation. You know it's important because the title of the section is the title of the presentation. So there's a prereq to this section. And it's talk to your users yesterday. You are absolutely worthless as a user experience designer if you have not talked to your users in bulk. How many of you have talked to the users of your app? 1, 2, 3, kind of. All right, how many? So talk to 1 user, 5 users, 10 users, great. So 30, 40, 50, none? Cool. This is by far one of the most important things you can do. It is also the step that is skipped the most often, so don't feel bad. We all just want to get out there and start building something. I am the same way. I have the same issues running an innovation department at a multi-million user company. But this step cannot be skipped. It can't. It's going to tell us everything that we need to know to get started. It won't tell us how to build our app perfectly, right? It's the faster horse problem. Henry Ford said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But what's important to know is that people wanted to go faster. The faster horses part is just extra. The fact that they wanted to go faster is the problem you're trying to solve. So Henry Ford should have still asked people what they wanted, and he did. And they said they wanted to go faster. You just take that and you give them a different solution to the problem, right? So talk to your users. That's really important. Just call them on the phone, get them looking at your app, talking about your app. You don't have to have a mock. You can just talk to them about your idea. This is the problem that I'm going to solve for you. Does that make sense? What does your day-to-day look like? My first question when I talk to users in our app is, what does your day look like? What happens when you get to work in the morning? Because when I'm designing the apps, I actually think about that person using the app and how it fits into their day. Cool. So one of the things that I myself had a lot of trouble with when I started building apps was the idea of imitation. It felt like cheating, right? As a designer, as someone who's an innovator, your ideas should be creative, right? They should be 100% original. But this quote really stuck with me when I saw it. Those who do not want to imitate anything produce nothing. And to kind of capitalize on that, there's a reason that Facebook and Instagram and Twitter all use a 500 to 600 pixel middle grid structure, why they all have rounded corners on their cards, why they all use cards. It's because it's a good idea. It's because users reading can only want to read about that span. It's because rounded corners make the transition softer. It's because cards create clearly sectioned content. Do you think that Twitter and Facebook and Instagram all came up with this idea on their own? Absolutely not. They all looked at each other, looked at each other's success, and they copied each other because it's a great idea. And you shouldn't be scared to copy your competitors' apps, not the whole app, but parts of it, the ideas that really work. And I'll explain why. If you are building an app that is competing with a company of 50 people, or 100 people, or 10,000 people, they have entire departments that are dedicated to talking to users and to figuring out the experience of the app. If you don't use their work to get ahead, then you're basically kind of doing something a little silly, right? Because they're basically giving you on a silver platter, here's what users told us is a good idea. You can take that and move forward from that point, or you can try to reinvent the same thing and get to where they already were, right? So if you're building a social app with a feed of time series data, there's a good chance that you should use cards, that you should make pictures prominent, that you should use rounded corners, and that you should use about a 500 to 600 pixel grid because it works. And you shouldn't feel bad about it. Does that make sense? That brings us to rule number 6. Get inspiration from your competitors. And the inspiration part is important. I didn't say copy, I said get inspiration. And this is not just your direct competitors. Your direct competitors are going to tell you a lot. They're going to tell you about what users wanted in terms of features, how users wanted it, what's most important, what's the price they're willing to pay per feature. But also from indirect competitors, people who are trying to solve the same problem as you. Let's say you're not trying to build a social media app, but you are building an app of time series data that has pictures as the main source of content. Well, you should probably look at apps that also have time series data, the pictures as the main source of content. They are not direct competitors of the business, but they are direct competitors in the user experience space. and they're trying to solve the same problem you are. So use them. Use them for inspiration. All right, this is the fun part. We're actually going to do a little bit of an activity. If you guys don't have paper, you can do it in your head, although it'd be good to do it with paper. I'd love for you guys to write down all of the main actions that a user does in your app. This example is for Yelp, right? We have view my reviews, add a review, find a restaurant, view restaurant details, and view favorite restaurants. I'm going to do about 5 minutes where we just think of all those app ideas and put them all on a sheet. No organization whatsoever. Sound good? All right. You guys want to move on? Next step? Or you guys want to wait a little bit longer? Any takers for waiting? Cool. We'll move on. So next step, I want you to prioritize them by high, medium, and low. What is a user going to do very often? What is a user going to do some of the time? And what is a user going to do not much of the time at all? So let's use the Yelp example, right? Viewing a restaurant and finding a restaurant, going to do all the time in the Yelp app. Barely ever going to view my own past reviews. Why would I? Not very often. I would do it, but I'm not going to do it often. And finally, viewing a favorite restaurant and adding a review, sometimes. Not as much as the other two. All right. Good? You guys get it back there? Cool. So now I want you to do the last step of this fun process. It's called sequencing. I want you to find how any of those actions link to each other. Starting at the high priority actions, how do they link downward to a lower action? For example, for something like Yelp, viewing restaurant details could either happen through viewing a favorite restaurant or through finding a restaurant, right? They are both things that happen as a result of one of those two actions. Yeah? I would leave sign up out of it. Yeah, sign up is a different flow. How are we feeling? Good? Yeah. Yes, ideally, you're starting all of these first level items with high profile items that graduate down to a lower profile item. Right? So viewing settings is a higher profile item than changing name, because I'm going to view my settings more often than I'm going to change my name. And obviously, there's a sequence there of viewing settings, changing name. Although don't worry about something like that right now, the settings. We're talking about just kind of the high-level actions. Cool. You guys ready to move on? Finally, there's one more part. We're not going to do this part right now, but it's called deconstructing. You take high-level actions such as search, and you break them into even smaller pieces like search by name, search by price, stuff like that. But what this does for you when you're done with this diagram is you have just built the navigation of your app, the navigation structure of your app. Because if you look at those sequences, if you've done it in a positive way, you've actually built the top 3 or 4 menu items that'll be at the top level. And then you've built all the subsections of every page below those menu items. And you didn't have to do any design at all. Let's look at Yelp. That example we just looked at, right? What was the number one thing that we're going to do? We're going to search. So what does Yelp do? They have a search bar as the entire top bar of their app, right? And then even below it in the subnav, the first 3 things are all about finding a restaurant. finding a genre of restaurant. And then on the far right, what comes up? The medium level things. Write a review. It's interesting, right? That's all navigation is. It's telling the story of your user based on priorities. Now, I want to talk about one other big thing here, which is going back to the competitor thing. If I was building a food app, a food rating app, I would use Yelp like crazy to understand what users care about in restaurants, right? Because Yelp has millions of dollars in design research. And what have they found out? We can reverse engineer this. They found out that obviously the name of the restaurant matters. Secondary to that, the number of people who reviewed it and the overall rating matters. And then the price and the genre matters. Those 4 things are the most important part of a restaurant. So if you're thinking of building a restaurant app, you better have those things on it. Because they found through millions of dollars of research and trial and error that those 4 things are the most important thing for users in a restaurant. Pretty cool, right? Because now you can build a restaurant app and hit the ground running with millions of dollars of research under you. This is the hardest part of user experience. You will find sections in your app that don't contribute at all to the purpose of an action. And at that point, it's time to let them go. It's hard to delete work that you've done. It's really hard. But if there's a part of your app that is not contributing to one of those user stories that you come up with, it should not be there. This brings us to point number 7. Your navigation tells a story. Any app that you use or any website that you go on tells the story of the user base who uses it. Just think about any app you use. The top level menu items describe the problems that that app is solving for the user. The medium level menu items, or the items within the page, are the sequenced actions. It's pretty crazy. You can take any app and reverse engineer the experience research that went into it and use it for your own. Finally, there's the idea that if users are whizzing by your apps, they're scanning, they're satisficing, they're not really understanding it, they're really treating your products more like a billboard, if you think about it. And so Steve Krug, the guy who writes Don't Make Me Think, says, if your audience is going to act like you're designing billboards, then design great billboards. And there's a few very, very easy kind of things that we can do to build great billboards. Number 1, visual hierarchy. You could tell me if those words were blah, blah, and blah, which of those blahs was the most important, which was the second most important, and which one was not very important. You wouldn't need the text to tell you, right? We all agree on that? It's basic, bold, contrast, and size. These are the lost arts of user experience, by the way. This is the idea of being unoriginal. This looks boring. This isn't jazzy. This isn't a cool spinner. But you don't need a cool spinner. You need people to be able to whip through your app without having to look around very much and just answer what they're trying to do, the questions that they're asking. Along those same lines, use nesting. If a part of your app belongs to another part, nest it in some way. Whether it's in an indent or surrounded by a box, it doesn't matter. And these all seem so simple. But if you look around the web, there's a ton of people still not doing this right. All of the great apps that you use are doing this right. That's what's at the core of their user experience. This is an app that doesn't use nesting, right? What the heck does laptops belong to? Does desktops belong to laptops? Is laptops just super important? I don't know. But you can see there'd be 3 or 4 question marks that come up. And as Steve Krug tells us, the more question marks you have, the worse of an experience you have. And this is great for when you're getting people testing your app in person. As they ask more and more questions, you can get a gauge of where the question marks are and also how poorly you've done your app. Because we've all done our apps very poorly, I guarantee it. Break views into clearly defined sections. This one's pretty straightforward. but also a lot of people still don't do it right, including myself. That's the thing. After doing this for 4.5, 5 years now, I still make all of these mistakes and have to remind myself of them. This slide shows as much for me as it is for you. So if I were to ask to outline each of the sections on this app, you probably pretty confidently could do so, correct? With no text or anything like that. If I said, what does that bottom left blue bar, which section does that belong to? You could tell me, right? Without any words, without anything like that. When people say use white space, they don't mean because people like the color white. What they mean is that white space creates sectioning. It gives us areas to focus on. Your app should use white space to create sections because that allows us to build scannable pieces. Along those same lines, it's important that we use conventions. And this is probably the biggest killer feature of any app is an app that uses the conventions of the web. If you had to sign up for my website, which has no text on it, where would you click? Right? If you had to log in my website, where would you click? Top right, right? If you had to place a logo on my website, where would it be? Top left. Those are conventions. But the designer in us doesn't want to follow in conventions. We have to innovate. We have to impress people. We're different. So we put the logo in the middle, and people go crazy. Because that's not what they're expecting. They're expecting a logo on the left or in the middle. They're expecting a sign up or my profile on the right. They're expecting a big green button in the middle to be how you sign up or get into the app. Don't break conventions. This one is also a huge one where people make a ton of mistakes. Make it obvious what's clickable. I know buttons can be ugly. I know links can be ugly. But it needs to be very clear what's clickable. A lot of times when people are building their apps, they don't want to make buttons look like the normal everyday buttons because that's boring. I'm telling you right now, just make them look like buttons. This is something that we scan to look for. We look for clickable things. We saw that it took people on average 4 seconds to click that link in the bottom right corner of the page because they were scanning for clickable elements. Does that make sense? Finally, minimize noise. Stop talking. It's the biggest one when it comes to writing text content. Stop talking. You don't need to. People understand you pretty well. The difference between the top and the bottom is the top makes me pause and ask a question. There's no need for it. There's no need to add that extra stuff. I know what sign up means. I don't need to tell you to tell me that you're happy that I'm using your app. Back off. Brings us to point number 8. Design your views like a billboard. The creative officer at Target says that innovation comes as a product of constraint. And I have my own example of this. I was contracted by a company called Netfile, it's actually from around here up in the mountains, to build a mobile app of their search functionality. They search all of the records in California's political filing database. And they wanted it to be mobile friendly, but they told me it has to have all of these columns of data in it, but it has to be mobile friendly. It has to work on a mobile phone seamlessly. It's a lot of BS, because that's a table and that doesn't work on a mobile phone. But that's a constraint. And we know a few things about mobile. We know that cards work really well on it. We've looked at competitors' mobile apps and they use cards to segment data, right? We know that a gray background with white cards is probably the best. So we can build something that just works off that. The biggest question is, how do you display the data? Well, we displayed it like checks. Because checks don't need labels. You don't need the extra room to label each field because everybody understands what a check is. So if you need to know the amount that someone paid, you can look at the payment field where a check would be. And we saved all the space there. But all of that innovation came from a very simple constraint. We need to fit these 8 fields in a card on the width of a mobile screen. And it was considered very innovative, I'll have you know, when we built it. Which brings us to point 9. Save creativity for the parts of your app that matter. We did not try to innovate the buttons. We did not try to innovate the search bar. We did not try to innovate the cards. We only innovated the data that was displayed within the cards. People don't want you to reinvent their entire app, what they're expecting. They want you to innovate the thing that sets you apart from everyone else. So don't reinvent your nav bar unless your app is all about building great nav bars, right? Don't reinvent how you display pictures. Not even Instagram reinvents how they display pictures. It's very simple. And I'm not saying that not all these parts of your app matter. The navigation matters 100%. It's one of the most important parts in your app. But you saw with the thing we did, it's very easy to build when you go through those steps. What I'm saying is that the parts that matter in this case are the things that set you apart. And those are not always design. That's important. For example, Facebook. Facebook does not use its creativity for their UI. Facebook's UI has barely changed over all the times it's been out. It's changed a few times drastically, and by drastically I mean changed the way the columns are shifted. But other than that, it stayed majority the same. Where is Facebook doing all of their innovation? Anyone have any idea? It's in their, oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. It's in their graphing, the graphing between users. All of their innovation is in machine learning and graphing as they try to suggest friends for your network. Because they know the more people they can connect you with, the more likely you are to come back into their platform and use it over any of the other social media platforms. Their key user experience thing has nothing to do with design. All of their creativity is in their engineering, and not even in their API engineering or anything like that. It's in their machine learning and their data science. It really depends on your app. But save that creativity for the parts of your app that matter. And for everything else, use conventions, design like a billboard, tell stories. Now, to get to your question, the one you originally posed. You release this app. You're pretty sure it's the best looking app that you could have possibly done with all the data you have. But how do you know it was the right decision? At GoGuardian, we track absolutely everything on every single one of our apps. Every click, every mouse movement, everything. And we not only track it, we track all the metadata with it. We know how long it took them to click on it, how many users were in their classroom, what are the other things they did before they clicked on it, what was the size of their screen, how much did they scroll before they clicked on it. We have all of this data, and we track it. And it results in billions of events. When you have 4.5 million users, and you track every event, it results in billions and billions of events. We do more events than Visa does transactions, or that Reddit does upvotes. But what it allows you to do is do event tracking, which is you can use that data to figure out every single story of a user within your app. How they click, why they click, what they did before they click, what are the things about that page that made them click, and you can discover some really interesting stuff. And the way that we test these ideas is the idea of A/B testing. When we have a hypothesis, which in an innovation department, that's all you do, is you have a hypothesis, you come to the exec board, and you say, hey, we want to test out this hypothesis, let us try it out. You use A/B testing, which is a way to test that out. So you keep one version of your app for 50% of your users, and for another 50% of your users, usually random, you give them the new version. And you track those events, and you see how they change with the versions of the app. First things first, 90% of the things you do won't change those metrics at all. Changing the color of a button, changing the way text is done, usually doesn't have an effect. But when it does change it, you have a solid argument on why or why not you should keep the feature, because it's all data-driven. It's not your opinion. And a lot of times, people say, but how is this data going to tell me whether I should use a green or a blue button? Well, the entire idea of your app is that people click the button. So as long as you're tracking that click, it doesn't matter why the green or the blue button works better. It just matters that it does work better, right? That they click that button more often. And this eliminates every single argument you can have with people because it's all data-driven. So when I was a product manager, before I was doing the head of innovation stuff, I was in charge of our teacher product, which has quite a few users on it. And when I was looking at the data, about 4 months after we released it, we had about 20,000 teachers on it. I noticed something interesting. I noticed we have these two views for managing your classroom, the timeline view and the screen view. And the timeline view shows a historic browsing of all of your students within the class, and the screen view shows your student's screen right now and allows you to interact with it. So what I noticed is that when teachers started a new session, within 5 seconds, a majority of teachers switched to the screen view. By default, we had the timeline view. So what that told us with data is that more than half of the users wanted the screen view as their first view. They didn't tell us directly. We found out with data. So what do? We switched the default view to the screen view. Haven't heard one complaint. And I still have the Slack message that I sent when I announced that. When I announced that our biggest product was going to fundamentally change the navigation, the way navigation was. And do you know how many complaints I had after I did that? 0. Because they weren't arguing with me anymore. They were arguing with data, and it's really hard to do that. Brings us to point 10. Test and refine with data. Once you have a first version of your app out, every subsequent decision should be made with data as your main arguing point. And you shouldn't be arguing with each other. You should be compromising and talking, but use data. So we've talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about how a good UX, the whole point of a good UX is it gets out of the way of the user. That a good UX is your job, no matter what department you're in or what you're doing for your app. That you can't afford a bad UX. If you have a bad UX, you probably won't get very far. That you should build for lazy noobs. They are your target audience. And that you should be modest. Finally, get inspiration from your competitors. Don't be shy about using a little bit of imitation. Use navigation to tell a story. When you stand back from your app and look at the navigation, it should tell the story of your user base. Design views like a billboard. Users should be able to fly through your app at 60 miles per hour and still feel confident about where they're going. Save creativity and time for the parts that matter. Stop trying to reinvent the button. The button is fine. And finally, test and refine with data. And so what I've attempted to do here is not tell you how exactly your app should be designed or what color palette to use. What I've tried to do is give you a mental framework for making every user experience decision that you make after this. And we can test it. Here's a Facebook post from my fiance, and we can test how great Facebook's user experience is using our metrics. Number 1, a good UX gets out of the way. There's barely anything on this post. The only stuff on it is the content that I care about, the picture, the person who did it, and then I personally don't, but the number of likes that are on it. A lot of people do care about that. That's it. The entire post, they could say when it was posted, where it was posted, and they do sometimes, but even that is a small text compared to the main content because they're designing it like a billboard. A good UX is your job. This one doesn't really apply here, but we can be sure that if Facebook was going down every day, we wouldn't use it as often. The fact that it loads quickly is because engineers helped with that. The fact that you feel comfortable with it is because design made it very appealing from the color scheme point of view. You can't afford bad UX. Facebook is pretty profitable. I don't think we can argue with their results. Build for the lazy noobs. Your grandparents use Facebook. They are lazy noobs. Be modest. Facebook did not try to reinvent anything. Their links are still blue. They have not done anything inspirational with their design here. Nothing. You could have made this design with no design classes right now, right? Do we all agree with that? You could have come up with this design without any design classes or user experience knowledge, anything like that. Get inspiration from your competitors. Yeah. Basically. This is what all posts look like nowadays. Use navigation to tell a story. We can even use card-level navigation for the story. What is the story of this picture? It's about a person. So what is the most prominent navigation point on this card? It's the person's name. What is a story? If you're ever watching someone use Facebook, or maybe you can judge yourself, when you see a post from someone that you're interested in, you dive into their profile. You see what else they've done. What's something new that they've updated their life on. That's because that's the story of the user, and that's what Facebook promotes front and center. The next story is, who else is talking about this? Who else has interacted with this? What else did they say? That's the other navigation item at the bottom. That's it. Those are the two navigation items. Because that's the story of how you use Facebook. Oh. And save innovation for the parts that matter. Like I said before, all their innovation is in the graphing, how they make social network connections, and use data. You can guarantee that Facebook is using data to make their decisions. I was talking with a Netflix SRE engineer, that's a site reliability engineer, and he was telling me about how when you use Netflix, every single one of you is in 17 different test groups at a time, believe it or not. Every single one of you is getting 17 different variations of Netflix for just you, one user. And they're all testing and refining it with data. It's pretty crazy if you think about it. And then what they'll do is they'll use that data to make a decision, should we keep this feature or not keep this feature? For all decisions, engineering decisions, design decisions, everything. I don't know if you guys have noticed, does anyone have like a Roku or a smart TV for Netflix? Well, now with Netflix, they automatically start playing a video if you hover over it. So what they discovered with this A/B test is for all of the users who had that feature enabled, they suddenly needed a lot more engineering resources because they were just playing videos all the time without even watching them. So what they were able to do is when they decided this is a good feature for us, they were able to scale their servers preemptively for their entire user base and have no downtime, right? A/B testing and data is not just for the designers, it's for every department. Finally, the resources. These are the 3 tools that I use to generate the results based on users. Hotjar is going to give you click tracking and also those cool videos of showing where people's mouse movements are. It's awesome. Event tracking with Segment. These are all free, by the way. They all have free plans. Segment is a way for you to integrate one script into your app or into your web page and basically get event data out of it. And then you can do these cool little things like turn on simple switches. And those switches will integrate other apps for you, like Google Analytics, Mixpanel, stuff like that. And finally, UX testing was Mechanical Turk. Highly recommend it. You can pay people 10 to 20 cents per hit. And you can limit it to like 100 pins. So you can pay $10, $20, and get 100 people to use your app. That's crazy. All of you who haven't done any testing yet, when you get a mock out, use Mechanical Turk. Pay $10 and get 100 users to use your app. It's worth it. Absolutely worth it, especially when you pair it with something like Hotjar. These 3 books are excellent. Anyone who's actually interested in diving into user experience as a profession or just as an interest, these 3 books are what have basically led me to dive into user experience like I have. Don't Make Me Think is all about how do you build usable web apps. It translates into normal apps. They're all just human things. Design of Everyday Things talks about why chairs are designed the way they are, why you know how to push on a door a certain way, all of those things. It's a very good book. And finally, Hooked is the book that can make you evil. It's the book that teaches you how to addict people to your apps to the point where they're no longer thinking before they open it up. Thanks for sitting through that.